my name is Kristen and this is Kristen Craze Books. I know I'm kind of late for this, but of course I have to talk about my best books of 2024. The time between Christmas and New Year's, I know that's when most people film and put these videos up, but my head is just not about filming during those times. Family's around, you're trying to relax. And then I really got into super organization mode at the beginning of January. My shelves, everything, went through my TBR, got rid of stuff. I was just clearing everything out, like all my beauty products. It just, for some reason, this year I really got the New Year bug, and that's not normally who I am, but I just embraced it, and that's probably a good thing. But that's all done. So I finally feel like I have time to stand here and talk about my best books of 2024. Now, that is obviously not a chore. I love to rave about books. I don't think I'm gonna do the worst ofs because there are none that I truly hated, not enough to make a video about, and I really, over the last couple of years, have just embraced DNFing. So I won't be talking about my worst books, but I'm gonna rave about some of my absolute favorites, and I'm hoping 2025 is even better for me because while I loved these books in particular, there wasn't a lot of choice for me. Even though I read over 100 books, there wasn't very many that I was this passionate about, but I do have a list of 10 and I loosely ranked them. So you ask me tomorrow, the list may be a little bit different, but I think the top 3 are pretty solid. I also realized I only own 4 of these. One you can't even get a physical copy of unless you want to pay $4,000. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But I'll slowly collect these over time as I find them because my goal is really to have the shelf behind me be just books that I love. So let's start with a horror that I loved, and that is I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. I know that Stephen Graham Jones has a really extensive backlist that I haven't even like dipped my toes into yet, and that is a really exciting prospect for me. I've only read The Only Good Indians and then this new one, and I loved it. One of my favorite horrors of all time, and I'm so happy that it ended up on this list. I have seen this book on a lot of best of lists and then a lot of disappointing or books I DNF'd, and I get it. I think that Stephen Graham Jones is an author who you're not gonna know pretty quickly if his writing style's for you, and I think this is a good one to try to test that because it feels more accessible than some of his other stuff. And something that I realized in 2024 is that I like to read from a complicated main character who may or may not be the villain. Like, they're presented as the villain, but you get their inner dialogues and you understand them and you root for them, and that was certainly the case in this book. We're following a teenage serial killer and you see their motivations and what drives them, and there may be something else going on behind the scenes, and I just thought it was really powerful. I think that Stephen Graham Jones has a lot to say and does it well, and the horror genre is the perfect venue for that. And he has a book coming out this year that I'm super excited for. So if you have a favorite Stephen Graham Jones backlist title that you think I should try, please let me know because I'm kind of overwhelmed with everything that he has. And I know that people who love him really love him. So if you're one of those people, help me out and let me know. So I'm really excited that that ended up on this list. And I think it's a perfect summer read. That's when I read it because I love a good slasher in the summertime. So if you do plan to read that one, I would save it for the summer because it is really truly perfect vibes for that. This was not planned, but speaking of summer, my next book is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, who, if she has a book out, chances are she's gonna end up on this list, except for yours truly. I know that's controversial. Yours truly is not my favorite book, but I love this series, and I'm torn between Part of Your World and Just for the Summer being my favorites. And though these are standalones, they all follow different couples. I would highly recommend reading them in order because I think you'll appreciate the cameos and the reveals that you get in this book. Having read the first 2, I was shocked. I actually went into this book not really knowing that they were connected in any way, and it was such a great surprise, and I loved the reveals and the connections between all of the couples in the end. So I do recommend reading them in order, especially since Part of Your World is just that good and people do love yours truly. The reasons I didn't like are just personal to me. But this, I think, the thing about Abby Jimenez is that she writes really great romances. There's spice, the chemistry is next level, the banter is amazing, but there's always a heavy theme in it, something that can be difficult for people to read about. So in this case, both Emma and Justin have complicated relationships with their mothers. She hasn't spoken to her mom in years, but her mom knows how to manipulate her, and Emma is a traveling nurse, and she thinks that she has this curse where whenever she dates somebody after they break up, the next person that person dates they end up marrying, and he thinks that he has the same curse, and he goes on Reddit and talks about it. She responds, they start DMing through Reddit, they take it offline. She ends up working in the same town he's from, sparks fly, but there's complications obviously. And I won't tell you why his relationship with his mom is complicated, because I think it's interesting to find that out on your own, but he's got to make some decisions as well and maybe reprioritize some things in his life, and something's kind of being forced on him that maybe he wouldn't choose from himself, but he has to step up. So we see them battling these two things and also falling in love. She has a great best friend who travels with her as well. We get a lot of their past. I just think that Abby Jimenez writes layered characters really well, gets invested in multiple ways, not just in the romance, but in these characters as individuals. I love that we get dual POVs. If I'm going to read a romance, I really do want the perspective of both characters. That's just me, because I need to know what everybody's thinking, so that's my preference, and she does that so well. So a win for her again, and I think she will probably be on this list next year if her new book 2025 release is anywhere near as good as this one. Then I have another romance, and it's a love song for Ricky Wilde by Tia Williams, and this is not your typical romance. If you've read 7 Days in June, I don't think it's guaranteed that you're gonna love this, and I think that has been the case from what I've seen from reviews, but I loved it so much. It's got kind of a magical realism element, and you really do have to suspend your disbelief to appreciate this one. But I've always liked like a light fantasy magical realism in a contemporary setting with a romance. There's something about that blend that works for me, even though I get why it's not for everyone, and if you're just expecting 7 Days in June, this is not what this is. But I love these characters. Again, I think Tia Williams has become an auto-buy author for me when it comes to romance. I'm very particular about my romances, but when I find a romance author I love, I really stick with them, and Tia Williams is one of them. And I just want to shout out Kennedy Ryan. I don't have Kennedy Ryan on my list this year, but I debated for the 10th spot between I Was a Teenage Slasher and The Kingmaker by Kennedy Ryan, so a little bonus honorable mention there. But she is just one of my auto-buy authors as well when it comes to romance. So it's like Abby Jimenez, Tia Williams, Kennedy Ryan. Those might be my holy trinity if I think about it. I'm probably missing somebody, but those are the first three that come to mind. And I love what she did with this story. You get some historical elements in this as well, like the Harlem Renaissance, and you see how these characters are connected. And I don't want to say too much. I think the best thing about this one is that you're surprised by it, but you just have to go into it being prepared to be surprised and not reading too much into things and just going with the flow. I actually cried at some parts. It was deeply emotional. There's sad moments in this as well. I was moved by the whole thing. I just thought it was great. And Tia Williams actually has a YA book. Now, I don't read a lot of YA these days, especially YA contemporary romance, but it's Tia Williams, and it's following the daughter from 7 Days in June, so you never know, she could end up on this list again in 2025, because I often have repeat authors. When I love an author, I love an author. I really realized that this year. Next up is Dreadful by Caitlin Rozakis, and this is one of those books that seem to be popular in 2024, where the main character in a fantasy is actually the villain, and I read a few of those in 2024, and 2 of them are on this list. You'll see the next one pretty soon. So obviously that is a theme and a trope that works for me, and I loved this debut. I can't wait for this author's next release. It also sounds really good. The thing with this one is I would try like a sample. I'm sure there's a sample on Amazon or somewhere to see if you can connect with the humor, because I always say this, humor is so hit and miss. It's so personal. It's so hard to capture in a book, and everybody's sense of humor is so different. So if the humor in this one doesn't work for you, the book's not going to work for you, because this humor's like a through line throughout the entire thing. I was laughing the whole time. I was so endeared by our main character, and I just thought that this was an absolute blast, like a 1-day read, 1 or 2 day read, and I had so much fun with it. I want to read you this one thing to get the idea, the vibes, and they say it's for fans of T. Kingfisher. Who's the biggest fan of T. Kingfisher? It's me. And it says that it's a high fantasy farce featuring a killer moat squid, correct, toxic masculinity, evil wizards, and a garlic festival. So we're following a main character who is evil. He's like the king of this palace. He wakes up one day without his memory. So if you don't like the amnesia trope, maybe this won't work for you. Normally I don't, but I think it was funny in this. It wasn't meant to be serious. And he wakes up realizing how evil he is, everybody's scared of him, and he hates his old self, and he's kind of battling with that and trying to make amends, but everybody's terrified of him. So, oh, I loved it. I thought it was so much fun. Maybe one of the most fun books I read in 2024. Actually, the next book that follows this trope is next to my list, and that's Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. Another new author to me who has a book coming out in 2025. And this again is following a main character who is evil. But unlike within Dreadful, where he's trying to make amends, no. Our main character in Someone You Can Build a Nest In embraces it, loves it. This is also a sapphic romance. Again, I think some of the humor you kind of have to just go with, and it has to work for you. But I loved it. I saw Kate from Kate Coy, who's back on YouTube. I love. Kate was one of my first booktube friends. Then she disappeared for a while, but we've always talked. But now she's back, posting videos left, right, and center, and I live for it, even though she didn't like this book. And we judge her for it, but I understand it. And she said, like, I understand this critique so much, but I didn't care. She said that the villains were like mustache twirly villains, and that doesn't bother me so much, but if that bothers you, maybe avoid this one. But it makes sense to me in the context of what the author was trying to do, and within this world, it's all kind of over the top and ridiculous. Our main character is like a shapeshifter who's evil and eats humans, and is having a sapphic love story that you can't help but root for, but they're also evil. And I don't know, I thought it was so great, and I can't wait for his new book. That seems to be the theme of this video. Lots of these authors have books coming out in 2025, and obviously that is making me very, very happy. Now we gotta do the annual T. Kingfisher. Every year I'm gonna have a T. Kingfisher in this list. That's just how it is. My first book of 2025 was a T. Kingfisher, my favorite T. Kingfisher of all time now, so you'll see that on my 2025 best books 100%. I might have read my best book of the year already, which is kind of bittersweet, but I love her so much. So, of course, I have a T. Kingfisher on this list, and that is her 2024 release, A Sorceress Comes to Call, which is a Goose Girl retelling. And I think T. Kingfisher, I always say this, she does a wide range of genres, from middle grade to fantasy romance to horror to retellings, and I think she's really leaning into dark fantasy retellings. She's done some lighter ones in the past, but she's going dark, and I think in 2025 she's doing that as well, and I like it. I think she excels at it, but she excels at everything she does because it's T. Kingfisher, and I'm her biggest fan. Like, I'm a fangirl for T. Kingfisher. And maybe that's kind of weird to say about an author, but I am. I've been a fangirl of everything my whole life, so why not authors as well? So she's like my number one. I love her so much. And this one is following a mother and a daughter, and I'm not as familiar with Goose Girl. I should probably read that fairy tale just to compare them, because I always think that's an interesting thing to do and to see how T. Kingfisher's mind works. But it's a mother and a daughter. The daughter is being kept kind of hidden from the world. She is not allowed to lock her door, and it's just a very private life. And then one day her mom comes home, and the two of them flee on this horse. They end up at this house, which is owned by a squire, and his unwed sister lives with them. And Cordelia, who's the daughter and who's the main character in this book, is very timid, and the sister is noticing that something's not quite right with the relationship between these two, and the mom is manipulating the squire to marry her, and the sister's obviously very suspicious but also kind of wants to protect Cordelia, and it's very complicated. There's a bit of a mystery that happens as well, along with like a really sweet romance that I wasn't expecting but thought was endearing and adored. So you do get a touch of that romance that I love from T. Kingfisher as well. So there's a lot to hold on to in this one, and I've seen a lot of people say that this is actually their favorite T. Kingfisher, which makes me happy, and I can see why so many people love it, and I love it as well, obviously. And I don't think that's just my T. Kingfisher bias. I actually think that this is one of her best. Now for the one that costs $4,000 on Amazon, and it makes me so mad because I want this book on my shelves. I love the book. I think the cover is amazing. It's a short novella. $4,000. It's because it was published by Subterranean Press. So if you know anything about them, they just do these like limited edition novellas usually, and it's always by authors who I love. Like Amira Grant has some that I read. I listen to these mostly because it's easy to access them on Everend and stuff. But Amira Grant has some from them, and then this one, oh, I loved it so much. It is Princess Floralinda and the 40 Flight Tower by Tasman Muir. My first Tasman Muir, I know. I was just reorganizing my shelves and I saw Gideon on my shelf, and I'm kicking myself. I know my friends are kicking me for not picking that up. It'll happen eventually, but this novella makes me more excited for that. And this is not your typical like Rapunzel story, though it seems like it on the surface. It's about a princess trapped in a tower. She's got her long hair, and all of these knights try and come to save her. And there's 40 flights they have to go through, 40 like challenges that they have to endure in order to save her, and nobody makes it very far. And you see that, it's kind of funny actually. So she decides, you know what, I'm gonna descend, I'm gonna save myself. And that's what she does. And we see her meet some interesting and hilarious side characters, maybe my favorite side character of the year if I think about it. And we just see her descend down and how that affects her, and the ending is so satisfying and unique to me that I just loved it. It was an instant 5-star. The moment I read that ending, I was like, that is fantastic. One I would reread because it's so short, so unique, not your typical Rapunzel story. And I just love it. And I'm so mad that I can't have it for my shelves because it is freaking expensive. We are now moving on to my top 3, and I do own all of these. And the first one is A Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. Sarah Beth Durst was on my list last year. She wrote Queen of Blood, and I marathoned that entire series, I think last December. Fell in love with it. This is very different from that, though they're both fantasy. This is cozy fantasy. I think this was in the cozy fantasy category for the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I think that's setting the wrong expectations. This is not a fantasy romance. This is a cozy fantasy. And while all of the cozy fantasy I've read, I think, has had romance like pretty much at the forefront, I would not say they're fantasy romances. It's something completely different. It's just the romance adds to the cozy, wholesome feeling of a cozy fantasy. So that's what this is. And there are some deeper conversations happening in this book than you might expect about the environment and climate change and things like that, that I think was really well done. I've seen people say, and I think that this is a good critique of it, that they wish they had gone deeper into that conversation, but I thought that the way it was done for me was great, and I think that the author is actually releasing more in this world, so maybe we'll explore that more with her 2025 release, and if she writes more in this world in the future. But I just liked that he'd even tried to tackle conversations like that in something like a cozy. The opening was actually very exciting, and so we're just following this character who has to flee from the capital city. She's the librarian there, and there is a rebellion that happens. They set it all on fire. She takes a couple of books with her and her sentient spider plant, and she sets sail to her hometown. Her parents have passed away when she was a kid, and she hasn't been back since, and it's an island. And when she returns, she realizes that it's not the same like lush place that she left and remembered. People are really struggling there, and it probably has a lot to do with decisions that were being made at the capital and why the rebellion happened in the first place. But she also has a sweet cinnamon roll next door neighbor who remembers her growing up and is trying to help her. And so she goes to the cottage where her parents lived, and it's kind of abandoned. She tries to fix it. She also has some magic. She knows how to do some magic that maybe she's gonna sell and try and help people. But she decides that she has to be subtle about it so people don't know. So she has like a jam shop that she sets up, and we see her make the jam. There's some great creatures as well in this world, and I just was so endeared by it. I loved this so much. I'm a cozy fantasy girl at heart, and so I was bound to love this book. It's a beautiful edition as well. And while I understand some of the critiques of it, it was perfect to me. I loved it. You know how much I love Raybear by Jordan Fueko. That is one of my favorite books of all time. Not just one of my favorite YA fantasies. I just think that that book is beautiful. The sequel I like, but not as much as the first book. The first book is just perfection to me. And I feel like I've been waiting for something new from Jordan Fueko for years, and I was. And then she released The Maid and the Crocodile, and I screamed. I was so excited. And where's the hype for this? This makes me so mad. Raybear got so much hype, not as much as I think it deserves, but nobody's talking about this. You're sleeping on this. Look at, you can't even see the cover, it's so shiny. You're sleeping on this book, and you should be ashamed of yourself, okay? I know that YA fantasy doesn't seem to be getting as much attention as it used to, and people have moved away from it. Come back. Pick this book up. It's Jordan Fueko. It's absolutely beautiful. I loved this book so much, and it makes me so sad. I have to check how many ratings it has on Goodreads, because I know last time I checked it was infuriating to me. It has 1,410 ratings, and it's been out since August. We can do better, people. Read this book. I need to do some work to push it a bit more. I don't think I've talked about it enough. When did I read this? November or December? Probably November, and I haven't filmed a wrap up, so I'm partially to blame, but you need to read this. It is a standalone set in the same world as Raybear. Now, I don't think you need to read Raybear to understand everything that's happening in here, but you will have a better grasp of the world. And why would you skip Raybear? It's amazing. We are following small Sade the day that she ages out of the orphanage, and we see her go to the capital city in search of a job, because that's what they do. They kind of just kick you out. They give you enough money to get to the city, and then you have to beg for a job. But she is unique in that she can kind of see gods, and there's a crocodile god in this that maybe comes, and I will leave it at that. I just think that where this goes is so unique, and the connections that she forms in this, and the issues that she faces, and like the villains in this are so annoying, but in a great way that makes you really, really root for her. And she makes the best found family. That is what I loved about Ray Bear. That is why I hold that series so dear to my heart, is because it has some of my favorite found family that I've ever read, and I think this is up there. She knows how to write found family, and I hope she continues to do that in every book she writes. Our main character actually has vitiligo, which I thought was great representation, and I was into some of the romances and the side characters in here as well. You just can't help but root for her and get so angry about everything that she's facing. She's just up there as one of my favorite main characters of the year, and I will sing this book's praises until more people read it because it's just so special to me. Well, that last one is one that I feel pretty good about recommending to pretty much anybody who reads fantasy. This next one is a controversial pick, and I just have to be true to myself. It's my favorite book of the year, and I saw it on a lot of most disappointing, least favorite books of the year, but this is who I am, and I love it so much, and it's Evocation by S.T. Gibson. I actually had an arc of this. This book is so stunning to look at, but I actually love the contents of this so much, and I think, I don't know, maybe the fact that S.T. Gibson wrote A Dowry of Blood sets around expectations for this, because if you're a fan of Dowry of Blood, there's a zero guarantee that you're gonna love this. They're not related in any way. I don't even think the writing's really the same, because the Dowry of Blood is like a Dracula retelling, and S.T. Gibson's really leaning into that writing style that makes you feel like you're of that era, while this one is modern day, and this one's more of a romance than that one was. This one is not leaning into the fantasy in a way that I think people probably wanted her to, because you hear a cult and you think you're gonna get a lot of witchy stuff, a lot of demons, and while there are conversations about that, it's more in an academic way. This almost feels more like it's dark academia without it being like set in a school, because you're following these three people who study the occult and practice it and are passionate about it, and David, one of the main characters, is possessed by a demon. You see that at the beginning, and the three of them are working together to help him, but it's their relationships that are driving this book. They have very complicated histories, and David and Reese were together in the past, and David actually is still in love with him, and that's pretty obvious early on, and they work together in this like secret society where they talk about the occult, and they are both vying for the same position, and they fight a lot, but they're passionate about each other, and we see how that connection happens. We see some of their past, but Reese is married to a woman named Moira who's always hated David, but throughout the course of the book comes to appreciate him. And actually Moira and David's relationship is my favorite. I love to see the connection that the two of them form as it goes on, and they realize that maybe they do have more in common than they think, and they have a shared love for Reese, which is sort of really kind of sweet, even though this is so complicated. And at the end, it's a polyamorous relationship, and I was rooting for it, and I thought it was really well done. And I read the novella that came out this year that happens before this, and it's not required, but I listened to it on audiobook, and I love that as well. The sequel's coming out this year. I don't know what to say. I just love the relationships in this. I'm a character-driven reader at the end of the day. You add anything kind of occult or witchy, I'm gonna like it. You add some complicated relationships, some intense past, some trauma people have to get over, I'm gonna be into it. You add a romance element too. You make it a little bit messy. This is a win. I loved it. I get why it's not for everybody, but it's a win for me, and this is who I am. I've gotta be true to myself. It's my #1 book of 2024. So there we go. Those are my top 10 books of 2024. Finally got that video filmed, and I would like to know what the best books you read in 2024 were. Do we have any in common? Did any of these books end up on your worst books list? Because I've seen a few of them on there, and while that hurts my heart, I understand it. I would love to know how your 2025 reading is going already. I think I've already read my best book of the year, which is so bittersweet. So let me know all the things down below. I'll talk to you all again soon. Bye for now.